to go over the rules so the audience knows the rules that the candidates have been given. The candidates may sit or stand to make opening and closing statements. Candidates may use paper during the debate for note-taking. Candidates may not send or receive text during the debate nor ask for assistance from campaign supporters or staff. Candidates may use charts, graphs, or appropriate props to help make their points during closing statements only. Candidates should spend time debating the topics as posed by the moderator. Attempts to change the subject will trigger corrective action by the moderator. Candidates are welcome to invite family and friends to bring campaign materials, and signs always have to be distributed outside the church. That is not Lakeview's rule, that is my rule. So the other thing I want to say about to the candidates is, if you are in the middle of answering a question, you're trying to land the plane, and you're not quite to the end of your thought, when you see the red paddle, you may finish your sentence, you may not finish a chapter, okay? Because we're going to be careful about that. That means finish your thought so we can move on to the other thing, on the other topics. Now, also, when you are 30 seconds away to the end of your time, Miss Eleanor here, our timekeeper, our skilled timekeeper, will hold up a yellow paddle. That's caution. You have 30 seconds left. Everybody clear on that? Now, the other thing I want the candidates to know is that my job as the moderator tonight is to bring out the best in you. That's my job. So we're going to be flexible on the time it takes to answer questions. Some of the questions I'll give you about 2 minutes, maybe even 3 minutes to answer. Because what this is not is a drive-by. We don't do gotcha drive-bys, and we don't lead the witness. In other words, I'm not going to say, do you believe in the United States of America? That would be an idiot question. We don't ask questions like that, okay? So what I'm trying to get from you tonight is your depth of knowledge on substantive policy issues facing Texas, okay? So now, if I don't believe we've gotten to the center of the issue, I may redirect a question. Sometimes all the candidates will get the same question, sometimes only one will. So we're going to be flexible, we're going to have a conversation. So I want y'all to take a deep breath and relax, because I know I've been in that seat before. I've been on both sides of the table. And I will tell you this, that I have a little bit of experience being a moderator. And I will tell you that United States Senator Ted Cruz got through the questioning, and he's running for president today. And Dan Patrick got through my questions, and he became the lieutenant governor. So you can live on the other side of my questions, okay? So now, what I want you to do, though, is to think about the entire time that you're answering questions, think about why the people should hire you for this job. Because this is a job interview, okay? We look at candidates as coming before we, the people, to ask for us to hire them to do a job. Now, tonight's candidate forum will be posted online. And I want you to know, if you don't already know, that Grassroots America is now a statewide organization. And you should know that people, particularly in the Tea Party grassroots movement, know that if you are elected a House member, the decision you make or you don't make will affect everybody across the state. So your video will be viewed by other PACs. It will be viewed by other groups that can make endorsements, other individuals that can make endorsements, and it will be viewed throughout your district. So we're going to make that available. So with that, take a sip of water. We're going to get started. Now to the audience. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Now I need a spotter. Who can I have as a spotter? Bob. Bob, Would you be a spotter? What I want you to do is, if people are having any trouble hearing, kind of watch for that. Y'all raise your hand. And Bob, if you don't mind, Bob, would you kind of perch to the side here so that you can see the crowd and you can let me know if we need to talk a little bit louder. I appreciate the members of the media who are here. We appreciate the time, and I'm going to tell you, like I told you guys on the phone today, we may end at 8. It depends on how good these guys are. I've done some debates before where the candidates were almost impossible to extract answers out of, and so we ended early. These guys may just be a powerhouse of information tonight, and if it is very interesting, I have so many questions here. And the other thing I want the audience to know is nobody knows what the questions will be. Because guess what? Not even I have made a final decision on exactly which questions I will ask. So no, everybody's got the same opportunity. So we're going to get started now. And the candidates drew lots to see in what order they would begin their opening statements. And the first one we have going is going to be Mr. Cole Hefner. Then that will be followed by Randy Davis. And then last with opening statements will be Mr. Philip Hayes. So in that order, Mr. Hefner, you may begin.
Thank you all for being here tonight. And my name is Cole Hefner. A lot of us have met before. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Texas. I'm now living in Mount Pleasant. I have a wife, Carrie, of 13 years, and we have 6 children that are all here tonight, 4 boys and 2 girls. And my mom's also here, so I'm glad they're here. My background is primarily construction. I was in commercial construction for 8.5 years, and then residential construction for 7 years before that. I'm now in the insurance business. As I was homeschooled and had a job, part-time or full-time, since I was 11 years old. So I know what it's like to work and be out in the public and have responsibilities. I'm proud that I'm an American. I'm proud to live in the United States. I'm proud to be a Texan. I believe we live in the best part of the best state in the best country in the world. I really believe that. I believe East Texas is the best place you can be on earth. But there are those that would seek to undo what has made our country what it is. The sanctity of marriage is constantly under attack. Religious liberties, our pastors are under attack. There are organizations in our country and in our state that cut up little girls and little boys in the womb and sell their parts to the highest bidder. We have people that want to take our Second Amendment rights away from us. We have some problems. But I believe that we need to elect strong men and women with courage, conviction, and fire in their belly that can fight for the principles that made our country what it is, and we can get back to what we were founded on as a country. Thank you all for being here, and I appreciate y'all's support.
Hello, my name is Randy Davis. Can you hear me? I'm running for House District number 5, and I'd like to first thank Joanne Fleming for inviting us here in the Grassroots America, We the People. I'd also like to thank the public for coming out and being part of the democratic process and being able to come out here and see the candidates. I spent a lifetime of service in the United States Army. Most of my time in service has been in uniform. I'm now an officer in the Texas State Guard serving the state of Texas and the citizens of Texas. And I'd like to continue this service to the state by being your representative. I'd like to, first of all, acknowledge my wife in the back. She's an amazing wife, Cindy. She supports me in everything I do. I have 2 children, Casey and Clint. They live in different states. I have 5 grandchildren, so that kind of tells you what my age is here. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and that's evident by me being an NRA member, a concealed handgun carrying licensed person to carry. I don't have it with me right now. Also a member of the Texas National Rifle Association. My priorities running for office are many and varied, and probably what a lot of you think about, securing the border. And when I think of securing the border, I think of we have a ship that's sinking with a big hole in it, and we're trying to bail it out, and we're running out of time and space. We need to secure the border with the resources we have. Also, for eliminating sanctuary cities, I have a plan for that. Creating economic growth, you built that, the government didn't. And I want to lower taxes. Thank you.
In the challenges of the Civil War, many took comfort in the lyrics of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, that amidst everything, God was working according to his purpose, that his truth was marching on. Americans have never responded to challenges with fear. Instead, they respond with assurance. My name's Philip Hayes, and I'm running for state representative because I believe that is still true. That despite all the challenges we face, I see examples of hard work, innovation, and liberty that give me assurance that his truth is still marching on. In no small part, that's because I'm from East Texas. I graduated from Lindale Public Schools. I was an Eagle Scout, a debate champion. I've been a longtime member of the Hideaway Kiwanis Club, and I'm still a member of First Baptist Church of Lindale, where I was baptized at age 11. I served 2 terms on the Hideaway, Texas City Council, where I was an advocate for taxpayers and strategic planning, and I have a history of grassroots activism that is unmatched by anyone else. I was selected to speak at the 2008 Republican National Convention. I've been to Florida as a volunteer coordinator. You elected me a delegate to our Republican National Convention in 2012. This is home for me. You know, after I finished my master's in American history at SMU, I'd been accepted to law school, but I heard that Greg Abbott's campaign needed a field director in East Texas. So I stayed here and I took on Battleground Texas. I've then been a policy advisor in the Texas Senate, where I was at the forefront of some of the most conservative reforms in decades. It's time to get America off the sidelines and lead this world again. And Texas can show the way, but not if we're trusting our future to mediocre leadership and limited vision. God's truth is still marching on today. I am the most experienced, the most conservative, and the most passionate candidate for this office. I'm asking you to let me be our voice in Austin. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I want you to understand, first of all, the backdrop of the questions this evening, and also share these same facts with the audience. In the 82nd Texas Legislature of 2011, the GOP had 101 seats out of 150 House members. In the 83rd Texas Legislative Session of 2013, we had 95 Republican House members out of 150. And in the 84th Texas Legislative Session, which ended in June of this year, we had 98 GOP House members out of 150. Gentlemen, we have a great number of squandered opportunities that are government reforms and issues that are being retained as a political bat to hit each other over the head with and to raise funds off of. So what we're looking for tonight are answers about solutions to the issues, and we want to know what you're willing to fight for. So the first question has to do with leadership in the Texas House. I want each of you to take 2 minutes to describe the character qualities needed in House leadership, from the House Speaker to the committee chairs. And think about what I just told you about the GOP dominating the House and why we haven't gotten this entire list of reforms done that frankly are in the GOP platform. So I want you to, let's see who want to go first. Mr. Davis, would you profile for us the character qualities needed in House leadership to get the job done? 2 minutes.
Is this on?
Give it about 5 seconds. Turn it on.
You hear me?
Yes.
House leadership. I guess we're talking about the Strauss cartel. Probably shouldn't go there, but I believe the House leadership, he is the third most powerful, that person is the third most powerful person in Texas politics under the governor and lieutenant governor. It seems like if we are a red state, a Republican state, why are we not getting more bills passed? For instance, Texas laws and Texas courts, U.S. laws and U.S. courts. Why is this not being passed? There seems to be a problem at the top. I believe if you are representing the party in power, which right now is the Republican Party, and it sounds like from the statistics that Joe has given, we've lost some seats. You need to stand up for what's right. You need to not bend under to political pressure. You need to make sure that you are doing what you were elected to do. And it seems like too many times people get into politics, they get money from wherever, and they take that money and they bend to pressure. I can only speak for myself. I would never bend to pressure. I would find her and take money that people would expect me to do something that they want me to do. I would stand for my principles. Obviously, the people in Austin at the top are not standing for the principles that they were elected to do.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes.
Well, I think what's very important in any representative that you send down to Austin, right now in this forum, I'm telling you exactly where I stand on the issues. I'm telling you where my policy positions, I'm telling you the principles that guide my decision making. You're learning about my character. It's that kind of belief that you have to take with you down to Austin. And then you have to stand true to what you told the people you were going to do. You have to stand in courage for the vision that you promised the people you would uphold. I can tell you, if you elect me your state representative, you will never have to question where I stand on an issue, because I'm going to tell you directly and honestly how I feel about those issues. And those will not change when I go down to Austin based on lobbying groups or anything else. And it's important that our state representatives maintain that kind of vision when they go down there to ensure that what they promised is what's accomplished. It's easy for a lot of representatives to tell the people one thing, go down there, act entirely out of accord with that, and then come back and make the argument that they were doing the same thing the whole time. You can't be scared of political pressure. You can't be scared that someone else is going to get more money than you in your next primary, and then you won't be able to win re-election. You have to be more concerned about the future of this state than about the future of your political career. That's what we need from our representatives, and that's what I can promise to you tonight I will bring down in Austin.
Thank you. Mr. Hefner.
You made a mention of almost a two-thirds majority in the House. There's close to a two-thirds majority in the Senate of Republicans, yet 51% of legislation passed, if I'm right, was authored by Democrats. Doesn't make any sense. The House leadership is important. They control they can have complete control over the flow of legislation, mainly through who they appoint as the chairman of the different committees. So legislation can flow, it can die, all kinds of things can happen. It's vitally important who the speaker is and who those committee chairmen are. From what I see, we've had a lot of issues placed on Republican primary ballots, securing the border, voter ID, all these things that are passed overwhelmingly by Republican primary voters, but yet we have a hard time getting some of these things into law. We keep sending more and more true conservatives down to Austin. You have 150 members in the State House, 52 Democrats, 20 hardcore conservative, but 40 or about a third are pretty conservative. And then you have a third of the Republicans that are not that conservative. And so that middle slice of squishes, I call them, a lot of times they control what happens. They side with the conservatives or they side with the liberals. And so I believe it's important that our leadership reflects the type of representatives we're sending down to Austin. And it also reflect the voters' issues on these ballots that have been passed. And so that's kind of the way I vision the leadership. Somebody that will enforce the rules fairly, let the House work, let the House kill bad legislation or pass good legislation, and quit bottling up these good reforms.
Thank you, sir. The state budget of Texas is made up of 35% federal funds. Okay? That is just the running average. 35% of the state budget revenue comes from the federal government. I want each one of you, and we will start with Mr. Hayes this time. Mr. Hayes, you can begin to tell us, what do you think, having 35% of the state budget made up of federal funds, what does that mean for the future of Texas?
Well, the problem with federal funding is that it always comes with strings attached. That if we agree to accept the federal money, the federal government usually dictates how we get to spend it. And that ties the state of Texas in with national policies that we may not want to be tied in with. Medicaid expansion is a good example. With healthcare taking up about 30% of the budget, or Medicaid up from about 20% in 2000, you see that's an unsustainable trajectory for federal funds in the budget. We've got to look to ensuring that the state of Texas remains an independent voice on how we spend our money so that we're not tied to these national policies from a federal government headed up by a president that is probably hostile towards the state of Texas. And with the President Cruz, it might not be so bad, but we're stuck with who we've got right now. I think it's also neat that our problem is that federal funding also drives additional state spending because the state is incentivized to increase spending so that we can match federal funds and we can get an increase in federal funds and maximize the amount of money we're getting from the federal government. So anytime there is a federal grant of money, we need to do three things. First, we need to always measure the cost of those mandates. We have to examine what strings are attached to the bill and then make a very careful decision whether we're going to accept this federal money. We also have to always measure the economic impact of these federal funds. Look at how that's going to be affecting the economy of Texas. Because if we're tied to the ship of state from the nation, we don't want the Texas economy going down like the California economy. And we've also got to find ways to identify and fund projects through state dollars. Anytime the federal government has a mandate that they say, you can get more federal funding if you do this, we need to examine, is that something that the state of Texas needs to be doing? And if it is, can we fund it through our own state dollars instead of looking to the federal government for help? Texas has always been one to accept federal money. When we were admitted to the Union in 1845, we got $5 million to settle our debts. Federal money has always been in the history of Texas. And it's always something that we need to ensure that we're examining very carefully so that the state of Texas can remain independent.
Thank you. Mr. Hefner, you'll go next, and it's 2 minutes to answer the question.
So what does 35% of the state budget coming from the feds mean?
What does that mean for the future of Texas?
You know, it makes me nervous. As he said, so many times with federal funds comes those strings attached. I feel the same way about state funds coming into cities and counties. Too many times they get you on the hook, get you hanging out there, and then kind of leave you hanging. So, you know, it's a slippery slope. It's something that didn't happen overnight. I believe we need to remain as independent from the federal government as possible. You know, we send dollars to the federal government through taxes, fuel tax, income tax, and we don't get back. For every dollar we send up, we're not getting our money back. And I think that's a real problem. So I would just do everything we could to be independent and free of those federal dollars that had strings attached. You know, if we can get as much of our money back as possible, I mean, we need to get all we can, as long as there's no strings attached that obligate us to things we wouldn't be for. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davis.
First of all, the statistics you told me, 30% of our funding comes from the federal government. It scares me to death. I didn't know it was that high. Obviously, there's strings attached to any money that's given to a person or to a government or to anyone. One thing that comes to mind is Common Core. We do not have it in this state right now, but that could be on the block here pretty soon. If you're going to get federal dollars, you're going to start adhering to our laws. Another thing that really bothers me is recently we've been starting to receive and slated to receive a large number of people coming from Syria, and they're coming into Houston. Why are they coming to Texas? Why is 70% of the people coming here? Federal dollars? Is it just Obama hates this state that much? Or is this state bending over and letting them do to them what they shouldn't be doing? So with any federal money that's brought into this state, there's going to be strings attached, and we need to examine it.
Thank you. What steps should the legislature take to return Second Amendment rights to the people of Texas? And I want to be very clear, so if we have people who get nervous about talking about guns, I'm talking about the people who can lawfully own firearms. What are the next steps that the legislature should take to return Second Amendment rights to the people of Texas? And Cole, we'll start with you, Mr. Hefner.
I like talking about guns. That's an easy one. Liberal people always want to try to regulate gun ownership like it's going to limit crime. I can lay my .40 caliber Glock up here on this table, and I can dance around and chant and praise and everything I want to do. It's not going to jump up and shoot anybody. It's all about the guy having it. You're not going to reduce gun crimes by disarming the good guys. It's not going to happen. The bad guys are going to get the guns, and they're going to shoot the good guys. And that's why gun-free zones don't work. That's why gun regulation does not work. Some of the highest gun crimes and murder rates are in the states and cities that have the strictest of gun laws in countries. And it just doesn't make any sense at all to take away my inalienable right to defend myself in order to decrease crime. It's backwards. So I don't believe you decrease crime by taking guns away from the good guys. So I would be for a constitutional carry. Some schools have even allowed some of their staff to carry. I think that is probably the most effective school security we could have. Because if a bad guy knows that people in that school are armed, they're probably not going to go in there and risk getting shot. So I'm for constitutional carry and expanding people's rights to own and carry guns as long as they're, like you said, lawful to own them and they're not felons or anything. So that's my short and long answer there.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
Second Amendment rights, very important to me. Being a soldier in the military, our first soldiers were people who had their own weapons, who came to the call of their nation when asked to come, and they came and fought a tyrannical government, which was the British government at the time. Another thing I remember during World War II, I don't remember it personally, but Japan was afraid to attack this country. One of the reasons being, they said behind every blade of grass and every tree was an armed citizen. If you have an armed citizen, you have people who are afraid to come and take your rights away. If you have armed citizens, you have a government that actually fears the people that they're supposed to be serving. One of the things I was happy to see was Senate Bill 11, where it allowed people on campus that were legal age to carry weapons, concealed weapons. I was glad to see that. And I have a friend that's a Republican, supposedly, and he asked me in my opinion on that. And I said, well, I think it's a good thing. If they're 21 or older, they don't have a criminal background, and they've been trained, why shouldn't they be able to carry a weapon? It makes the university safer, in my opinion. He was all against that. So we'll have problems. We have problems with this and that. The Second Amendment right is guaranteed in the Constitution. The paddle's up again, so I've got to cut it off.
You got 30 seconds.
Okay. It's guaranteed for us, and I believe that if everybody had a concealed weapons permit, only 0.3% were involved in any type of crime. That's a very low percentage. And I'm also for going ahead, as Cole brought up, I'm for that also, is constitutionality of being able to carry a weapon. If you can buy it legally, you should be able to carry it.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes.
Yes, I think everybody's going to agree that Second Amendment rights are great. I remember back in 2010, I actually spoke to this group on behalf of the Students for Concealed Carry on campus in Texas. Working in the Texas legislature this most recent session, I was glad to see that pass. I was glad to see open carry pass. But I like the way you phrased the question. What can we do to return our Second Amendment rights? Because those are our rights that have eroded, that have naturally been taken over by the government. I think a very interesting and unique thing to look at is the way the state of Vermont, of all places, handles gun control. In Vermont, since 1903, they have enabled you buy a gun, you pass a background check, and you can carry it openly, you can carry it concealed, that's it. There's no state mandating testing, there's no paying for an additional course, there's no official license that you have to get from the state that tells you that you're entitled to your Second Amendment rights. You're entitled to your rights under the Constitution of the United States of America by virtue of being a citizen of the United States of America. And you do not need to necessarily carry a license to exercise those rights. So I think that's something that the state of Texas should look for when we move forward next session for our Second Amendment rights, is the way that Vermont and other states similar to Vermont have handled gun control in the past.
Thank you. The next question has to do with state law enforcement. What do you believe is the most important issue facing state law enforcement? Why do you believe that? And give specifics about how you would support law enforcement in facing this issue. Now, a trigger for you on this is that there are interim studies groups set up by the Senate, by Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and I know there's going to be a hearing pretty soon in the House that's talking about the way state law enforcement handles racial coding, racial issues, and there was this idea that perhaps the legislature needs to tell law enforcement how it can improve its job in that area. So with that as a backdrop, tell me what you believe is the most important issue facing state law enforcement, why you believe it, and what you would do to help law enforcement with that particular issue. It may be one about racial profiling. It may have nothing to do with that. I'm just simply pointing out that we do have interim studies that are regarding race relations and racial profiling with the state law enforcement. So now I think this is a pretty important issue, so let's go ahead and take 2 minutes each for that. And I think this time, I think it's time for Mr. Davis to start off this time.
Thank you. Law enforcement. I didn't tell you, but being in the military, I was also a military policeman. And my background is law enforcement. And I begin to see a big problem starting with the federal government on down. There's been a war on police, and it starts from the White House down, and it really starting to worry me because people are losing respect for the police. If a police officer says or does anything, they have to be careful because they're usually on YouTube, on camera, and somebody comes back and second guesses them in a Monday morning quarterback. One of the things I did see recently that really worries me about is illegal aliens coming to this state, committing crimes over and over and over again and being protected in sanctuary cities, and the police are having their hands tied. Case in point, about a week ago in Dallas, a 3-time deported criminal that had come back from Mexico ran over a Dallas police officer and almost killed that person, and broke every rib in his body. That is a problem. I see it as a big problem. And I see that their hands are tied at state and local levels because they are afraid to go out and approach a person, to apprehend a person. It might be because of color, background, national origin, whatever. They're afraid what's going to come about and what's going to come in the news about them.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes.
I fully support our law enforcement, and I do not think that racial profiling or racial tensions are the biggest issue facing our law enforcement officers today. You know, we do have crime in the state of Texas. I helped analyze bills coming out of the Senate Criminal Justice Committee. And I think probably some of the biggest challenges that law enforcement is facing today are these transnational gangs that exist south of the border and then take operations up here into Texas. Many of you probably know that Dallas is a major command and control center for some of these drug cartels who are trafficking humans, who are trafficking drugs, who are causing a lot of crime in this state. And it's important that we take a very proactive approach to ensure the safety of our citizens. And that comes not by just assuming that the police need more body cameras or that there's racial tensions. We need to be supporting our law enforcement, listening to what they have to say, and responding to their views on the topic. What do they need in order to combat these drug cartels, combat these human trafficking, and these terrible abuses that are occurring in Texas? It is unconscionable that you have truckloads of people being brought across the border by these drug cartels who have paid a lot of money, who are trying many times to have a better life, semi-truck trailers full of women and children who are dying in Texas, in our deserts, because they're outside, because these drug cartels are controlling our immigration policy. We have to give our law enforcement the tools they need to combat that. We cannot allow a humanitarian crisis like that to occur in the state of Texas. So that's what our law enforcement needs to be focused on. That's what we need to be listening to them about. Not setting up committees to study how could they be friendlier to their community, but instead, what resources do they need to stop the horrible atrocities, that are occurring on our border.
Thank you. Mr. Hefner.
Well, I was raised to respect law enforcement, to appreciate them. Today I received the endorsement of the East Texas Police Chiefs Association, and I'm happy about that. And I told those guys there's a big problem in today's society. There's an element in our society that is becoming anti-law enforcement. They're viewed as people that are taking our freedoms and infringing upon our rights. I believe the opposite. Our country was founded as a country of laws, written. We don't have a dictator or king that comes in and changes laws whenever they feel like it. And those laws were put in place to protect our inalienable rights, our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when you have these laws in place that need to be protected for us, you need a tool, a mechanism to keep us free. And that's what law enforcement is. They're the mechanism that enforces the laws that keeps us free, so that my wife and 6 kids can get in the car and go to the grocery store and buy groceries without feeling like they're going to be robbed or killed. We can run up and down the road and look at our countryside, and we don't have to feel like we're going to be attacked or killed. And so I think they need to be appreciated. They need to be supported. My brother is a deputy in Camp County, Texas. He gets up every day and puts on a bulletproof vest to go do his job. A bulletproof vest. How many of us in here wear a bulletproof vest to work? Is there anybody? Yeah, and he's making $32,000 a year or something. So I think they need to be supported morally, financially, and we need to appreciate what they're doing for us because they're keeping us free.
Thank you. Now, this next question will take about a minute to answer. So I want you to reflect upon what your oath of office, should you win this race and you are taking an oath of office, tell me what the rule of law has to do with that oath of office. And I think we'll start with Mr. Hayes.
Now, I can tell you one of the proudest moments of my life was when I was sworn into the Hideaway, Texas City Council. And I took the same oath that is a variation of the same oath George Washington took, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. You know, if his highest goal had been a united country, had been a strong country, he could have just declared himself a king. But he understood that more importantly than just the country surviving, it was important that the country's ideals survive. So he took an oath of office not to preserve, protect, and defend the country. He took an oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. That is the highest aspiration of every political office in this country, from the president to your local city council. That at every level of government, we are working to uphold those American ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in a country that is governed by the rule of law to ensure that our future generations enjoy the same liberty that we do today.
Thank you. Mr. Hefner?
Could you repeat that question?
Yes, when you take the oath of office as an elected official, what does the rule of law have to do with your oath of office?
What does the rule of law have to do with the oath of office? Everything. Like I said, we're a nation of laws written in the Constitution, not a dictatorship, not a tyrannical government, not communist or socialist. And I think it has everything to do with the rule of law. And it's important that we stick to the Constitution. You know, there's a lot of laws passed that violate the federal and state constitutions. And so that's my answer. I guess it has everything to do with it.
Thank you. Mr. Davis?
The first oath of office I ever took, I was 19 years old. I was in the military. It was to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I took that very seriously, and that actually was a legal and binding oath that I took. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected as state representative from this district, that is an important oath I would take to defend the Constitution of Texas and uphold the laws of Texas. And when I say it is important that we think about it as being a rule of law, laws are made, but a lot of people don't adhere to them. They think, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, it does apply to each and every person. If you're going to use your name and take that oath, you should adhere to it.
Thank you. Now, the next series of questions are going to have to do with border security and illegal immigration. They will be short answers. 1 minute. I need you to tell me why sanctuary cities are a problem for Texas, if you believe they are a problem in Texas. Mr. Davis, you've already hinted at that, but be very specific, and in 1 minute, tell us why sanctuary cities are a problem.
Sanctuary cities, what I understand, we have at least 3 of them: Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. I believe it was the 3. Problems with sanctuary cities is that the state or the local officials in those cities are withholding criminals and not turning them over to the federal authorities, people committing crimes. What that creates is an environment for these people to know they can go into these cities like Dallas, and they can come in and say, well, I'll be safe here. I don't have to worry about being turned over by being an illegal alien. And what that does is just create more crime and more problems, not only for the state and local officials because they're guarding them, but it creates problems for the federal government trying to get them out.
Okay. Mr. Hayes.
You know, I'm grateful for Governor Abbott sending the letter that he did to the Dallas County Sheriff and making state grants no longer available to sanctuary cities in the state of Texas. Sanctuary cities flaunt the rule of law in this state. I think many times the people who pass them have good intentions. They want to make sure that the good people who are living in our shadows have a safe haven. But sanctuary cities create havens not for good people, but for bad people and for criminals. And they hinder our law enforcement when they're trying to take on huge problems that are affecting the state of Texas. If Governor Abbott calls a special session, I hope that the legislature acts and works to eliminate sanctuary cities in the state of Texas. I would guess that next session he's going to make it an emergency item, and we are going to see action on sanctuary cities. And I can vow to you that as your state representative, I will not rest until legislation is passed outlawing sanctuary cities in the state of Texas. We are a state that respects the rule of law. We are a country that is beholden to the rule of law, and we should respect that.
Thank you. Mr. Hefner.
Sure, I believe it's a problem, and it's a problem because it violates the rule of law that we've been talking about, the Constitution. And the reason those laws are put in place are to keep us free. And when local law enforcement or local cities openly say we're not going to cooperate and abide by the laws of this country, I think that's a real problem. It opens us up to a lot of criminal activity. You know, we've had some guys that were released and caught, released and caught, and people got killed because of that. And I believe it's a real problem, and because it violates the rule of law and causes the crime to increase and all that.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to put y'all really on the spot now on sanctuary cities. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick issued a statement a couple of weeks ago that he already has the votes necessary in a special session to pass a ban on sanctuary cities in the Senate. We need only 16 votes in the Texas Senate to pass a bill in a special session. The House, a survey of House members indicates we already have the votes necessary to pass a ban on sanctuary cities. I personally, and Grassroots America as an organization, supports the letter, the indications of Governor Abbott, what he intends to do about sanctuary cities, and reining in the lawlessness that we see, for example, in the Dallas County Sheriff, Lupe Valdez, who's decided she's going to pick and choose which laws to enforce in Dallas County. So we support the governor there. But in the governor's letter, he says that sanctuary cities constitute an emergency and that they are a public safety and a national security risk. The question we've been asking is, why wait? Tonight, I want to know if someone put in front of you a letter to sign as a candidate for House District 5, a letter telling Governor Abbott that you believe that he should act now, would you sign it? I only want a yes or a no. Okay, let's see. Let's go with Mr. Davis. Would you?
Yes.
Philip?
Yes.
Mr. Hefner?
Yes.
All right, you may see that letter.
No pressure.
Well, you know, Ernie, I said this was not a drive-by tonight. Okay. What is the greatest adversity you've ever experienced? The greatest adversity you've ever experienced. And what is the lesson you learned from it? Mr. Hefner, 2 minutes.
When I was 29, I was elected as county commissioner. And going into office, we had a lot of political strife. People were indicted and removed from office. And we had a huge budget deficit that had been created by courts before us. And in doing that, we had to go to work and we had to make a lot of tough decisions to balance our budget. We cut our own salaries. We reduced the retirement match. We laid off workers. We outsourced services. We fired the cleaning company and told everybody they had to clean their own office. It was rough. Our judge was suspended, and so we had 2 commissioners that didn't know a whole lot about what was going on. And so the 2 new guys came in, just business guys that wanted to work for their community, and we went to work. And that was hard to do. On the local level, you're close to those people. Those jobs that we cut, I'd go to the grocery store and see those people in the grocery store. I saw them at church. I saw them in restaurants. And that's not fun. I lost sleep over it. But we did what we had to do to get the budget balanced. And that was the hardest thing I've probably ever done, is laying those folks off and making the cuts necessary to make that budget work.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes.
When I was a freshman at SMU, I almost failed out my freshman year. I had sailed through high school, never had to really work hard at it, and I got up there, and it was an entirely different ballgame. And you really had to double down and reset your priorities. And you learn how to prioritize when you're going up against something like that, when no one really cares as much whether you succeed or not, like they do in high school. And that really taught me to prioritize myself. It taught me to double down on my work ethic. It made me a much better person. It drew me closer in my faith and everything else. So it's very important that we have a state representative that's able to prioritize, because it's a huge workload when you go down to Austin. Over 8,000 bills last session that you've got to work through. It's an incredible amount of work. It's going to take long hours every time. So it's important that you're up to that challenge and that you're able to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Well, being 65 years old, I probably have a few more than each person on each side of me, so I've had a lot more to deal with and look at. Everything from children to work experience to my time in the military. I can recall one time being in Vietnam, having to what we call bust 3 other fellow military policemen for drugs. That was a hard decision for me to make because I worked with them on a daily basis. They took my back in combat when we had to work together. But I knew that being the right thing to do was I could not allow them to be selling drugs to other GIs. So I had to stand up for what was right. It almost cost me my life. And after 3 beatings one day and a hand grenade put in my bed, they transferred me out of that unit to another unit outside gone. Did I do the right thing by busting fellow military police? Yes, I did, because I stood what was right. I knew it was wrong, and somebody had to make a stand, and it was not me who would.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll go to some individual questions now. Mr. Hayes, you mentioned in your opening statement that in Austin, you were able to put forward some conservative reforms and push for some. Would you take 2 minutes and tell us about those and be as specific as possible?
Well, I worked on a number of bills, including the American Law for American Courts bill that unfortunately died in the House in that committee. One of the things that I was very passionate about and that I worked for specifically was with the Texas Senate Intergovernmental Relations Committee was on local debt transparency. This kind of tied into my background of being on the city council. We have a ballooning local debt crisis in the state of Texas. Billions upon billions that our taxpayers are being saddled with that many times they don't even know because it's not as visible a level of government. Something I'm very passionate about is transparency in government and truth in taxation. And so what we worked on was to ensure that certificates of obligation are reformed. That's the type of debt that a government entity can issue without going to the voters. It was originally instituted in the 70s in order to deal with emergencies. Say your fire department gets wiped out by a hurricane. There's no time to hold an election, so they issue debt, they build new ones so they can provide those services. But some organizations have started using that to bypass the will of the voters. You saw that out in Rockwall County. They had a county courthouse project that had been defeated by the voters twice at the polls. The county commissioners issued certificates of obligation and built it anyway. That's not right in the state of Texas. Taxpayers should have a say in how their taxpayer dollars are being spent, especially if you're going into debt for future generations. So we worked on making it easier for citizens to petition their government in order to hold a vote when certificates of obligation are issued. We also were going to make it illegal for you to issue certificates of obligation to build a project that had been rejected by the voters at the polls. That was Senate Bill 310 that we worked on, got it out of the IGR committee, got it out of the Texas Senate, sent it over to the House, where again, it wasn't able to get out of committee. And that really encouraged me, I think, to get involved. I was tired of sitting on the sidelines as a staffer down in Austin. I felt if I could get out there and push for these bills on the House floor, we could get some stuff done, especially for our local debt problem in Texas.
Thank you. Mr. Hefner, what should Texas do regarding the definition of marriage in Texas?
What should take? You know, there's been a lot of folks on the conservative side and libertarian-leaning side that want to do away with marriage license in the state of Texas. I believe that marriage was instituted and created by God to be between a man and a woman. I believe it is not only right, but it's good for the economy, it's good for the society, for the state to recognize this institution that God created and to support it. Not only to recognize it, but to support it. And, you know, there's some statistics out there, David Barton can tell you, in same-sex marriage households, when you go from a traditional household, a man and a woman, to two men, your domestic violence increases considerably, like 6 times. And I'm not saying this when it goes to a lesbian household, it increases by 16 times. Suicide rates increase, crime rates increase, and so I think it's important that we as a state recognize marriage as God intended it between a man and a woman, and that we promote and recognize that institution.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davis, do you believe there is more work to be done regarding pro-life issues in Texas? And if you do, name a couple of those.
Yes, I do. Right now, Texas is winning. We have, I believe it was House Bill 2, that abortion cannot be done after 20 weeks. And then we all know the bill that was passed, eliminating a lot of these clinics from being able to give abortions. So that produced a lot of clinics because they did not meet certain medical standards. We are winning in this state, but there's more that can be done. I believe that once the heart starts beating at 8 weeks, that's maybe something we could work on in this state and get passed. I believe that life begins at inception. I'm a Christian, and I believe abortion is wrong. It is the law now, but that doesn't mean it's right. We need to keep working in this state to keep pushing abortion clinics back and everything we can do. Planned Parenthood, I call it Planned Butcherhood. It has been defunded state tax dollars, but we need to defund it federally and get rid of this atrocity to our unborn children.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go back to border security now, and this answer will take about a minute, I think. I want you all to think about what operational control of the border means. You know, border security is a term that's just thrown all over the place. So we need to know what you believe the definition of border security is. Operational control of the border. What does that specifically mean? And outline that in a minute. And let's start with Philip Hayes.
I think operational control very simply means that there's no entry outside the legal ports of entry along the Texas border. And I think that's very important. You know, this is a beef that we've had with the federal government going back 150 years. When we were admitted into the Union had two responsibilities: take care of the Indians that were raiding out the west, and secure our southern border with Mexico. And I think probably 1845 was the last time our southern border was secure, when General Zachary Taylor took an army down to Mexico City. Texas dealt with the Comanche problem on our frontiers ourselves. We did it with Texas Rangers. We're still waiting for the federal government to act to secure our southern border so that we have operational control. I'm in favor of using state resources to create a state border patrol under the command of the Texas Rangers to gain operational control of the border, and we should send the federal Congress the bill. Just like Governor Abbott did at the recent $840 million border surge, we should do the same thing today to ensure that our citizens are protected.
Thank you. Mr. Davis.
Border security. I can speak to that firsthand. Being in the Texas State Guard, I actually have troops out of my unit that are down augmenting the Border Patrol right now. There are ground search and rescue picking up bodies that have come across and they've died en route. It's like a sinking ship. I talked to everybody down there and they're telling me, Captain Davis, they'll say, you know what? We have to come so far back from the border, we have no control of this. We sit there and watch people come across. We've seen people on night vision goggles come across, aided by the Mexican army with military equipment that the American government has given them. So we need to actually take control and start putting state resources, Texas State Guard, Texas National Guard, and beefing up the other law enforcement agencies we have to try to stop this. If we don't, we will not have a country, we will not have a state, because a country and a state without borders is not a country.
Mr. Hefner.
I believe that there's 29 legal points of entry along the border, 26, 29. Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution gives states the authority to form what's called an interstate compact, where the several states can come together and enforce federal immigration law that the federal government refuses to enforce. Right now, we're spending a lot of money down there with the surge. We're putting more troopers, boats, helicopters, a lot of technology, and it's working. It's slowing things down, but our state guys are still limited as far as they can go. Right now, we're having to get them for things like, I was down there a year ago, and when they catch them in a park without paying their daily pass, they can get them for criminal trespass. But if we give them the authority through the interstate compact, then they can actually enforce these laws that are already on the books. And that does not have to be approved by the president, but has to be approved by the state legislatures and the U.S. legislature, but not the president's signature.
Thank you, Mr. Hefner. Okay, let's talk about transportation.
Could we talk about the interstate compact for a minute? Is that, can I?
Well, sure, we can do that for a minute.
Can
So
I-
I'll let you go, and then I will let Mr. Davis take a minute. You take a minute, you take a minute, and Cole, if some lightning bolt strikes you and you got a minute's worth to talk about interstate compact, let's hear it.
Well, I was wondering if I could ask Mr. Hefner how he thinks an interstate compact would work, if he could explain how his interstate compact would solve the border problem, what
Well,
specific parts
I will allow that question. Mr. Hefner?
I didn't say that. It authorizes state law enforcement to enforce federal immigration law that the federal government refuses to enforce. So several states can come together and form an interstate compact. It's authorized in the United States Constitution.
My concern, if I could, with an interstate compact, I'm not sold on them yet, and I read the pager, not just the executive summary, but the in-depth analysis. Maybe I could be convinced on it, but the way I look at it now, we already have an interstate compact for border security in the United States of America. It's called the U.S. Constitution. The federal government has a responsibility to secure our border. We pay taxes to the federal government for them to keep our borders secure.
Which they're not doing.
That's correct. The interstate compact would create another agency, another bureaucratic level over Texas with whatever other state we get to agree with us, which would probably be Arizona, because New Mexico and California, they're Democrat states. They're not going to want to enter an interstate compact with us, which makes it, regardless of the logistical difficulties of us working to secure both the Arizona and the Texas border, which are not contiguous, why would I want to spend a single dime of Texas dollars to help secure Arizona's border? I want to spend Texas resources to secure the Texas border to keep Texas citizens safe. And I'm not convinced that how an interstate compact, where those resources are going to be coming from, that makes our border any more secure than it is today.
We just put $840 million down there, and our guys don't have the authority to enforce laws that are already in place. So this would give them the authority to enforce the law with the money that they already have. I think it's pretty simple.
It would authorize Texas, if we agreed to an interstate compact, the specifics of which are up for debate, Texas would enter into an agreement with whatever other state about how to secure their border. Congress would have to approve that, and in the end, it would be funded by the state of Texas. The Texas resources would be pulling into it. It would be fiscally irresponsible for the federal government to fund an additional state border patrol created by an interstate compact while it's hard enough to get them to fund the United States Border Patrol. I do not want to send any dollars of Texas money to Arizona to secure their border. I want to secure our Texas border with our Texas resources. And we can do that in Texas by creating our own state border patrol, creating our own state laws against illegal immigration, detaining them ourselves, and then sending them back to their country of origin ourselves. We don't need Arizona, we don't need California's approval to do that. So I'm not sold on the interstate compact.
Well, I think it would be a lot more fiscally responsible to allow our state agencies to actually be able to use the money that we're already spending down there. So that's my view on the interstate compact.
So let's authorize them to do that. We don't need an interstate compact. I don't see why we need an interstate compact to do that.
Okay, Mr. Davis, I'm going to let you take a minute if you've got anything to add to that, and then I'm going to put a period at the end of it.
Thank you. It was nice to be between these two. My ears are still ringing. They both have good points. One of the points I'd like to point out, though, is every time you put state resources on the border, somebody's got to pay for it. We're hurting for money right now as it is in Texas, and I know every time we send somebody from the Texas State Guard, the state of Texas has to pay for that. There's limited funds. Unfortunately, that's supposed to be left up to the federal government, and they're not doing their job. I'm hoping that very soon we get a new president, hopefully Ted Cruz, who adheres to the Constitution and they can stop this madness down there. But it's not a problem that you can solve by saying a compact here or spend dollars here or do that. If the federal government would enforce the laws that are on the books now, we wouldn't have that problem. But in the meantime, we need to do what limited resources we have with a limited amount of money and try to at least secure the border in Texas.
Okay. To put a fine point on this, let me just say a couple of facts here. Fact number one, even though we have $840 million to spend on the Texas border, until someone in state leadership, and the person who is in charge of law enforcement and is the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Texas, of course, is the Attorney General, is the state law enforcement officer, but the guy that is in charge of law enforcement and the orders that would go to the Texas National Guard and to DPS would be the governor. And so I will tell you, having sat through several hearings on border security, when the orders that are given to state law enforcement are your rules of engagement or no engagement, and you are to simply tell someone that you interdict crossing the border illegally, sit over here and wait until an ICE agent or a Border Patrol agent comes up. My friends, we're simply participating in the federal government's deadly catch and release program. Now, final point. An interstate compact that is approved by Congress would have a fiscal note attached if any states got together and did not, in that interstate compact, talk about the funds necessary to do the job that the federal government's not doing. Those states would be led by some really incredibly stupid people. So, if there is a fiscal note attached to that and Congress is in charge of the purse strings, I would think that a GOP-controlled House and Senate in Washington, D.C. should have sense enough to send money to do the job that the administrative branch simply won't do. And if they don't do it, we need to fire every one of them and send in some replacements. Okay, now let's talk about transportation. Now that Proposition 7 has passed, that gives the State Highway Fund billions in more revenue, do you believe this solves the transportation issue in the state of Texas? Why or why not? This is going to be a minute answer, and let's start with, let's start with Cole this time. Mr. Hefner.
So do I believe that
Do you believe Prop 7 just solved all the problems? We have nothing else to worry about where transportation is concerned.
Oh no, we're growing. State demographers say by the year 2035, Texas will be a population of over 42 million, and that's up from 18 million just 15 years ago. So I believe what we're doing is we're spending a lot of money on a lot of things that the government shouldn't be doing, and we're ignoring some of the core responsibilities, which are infrastructure, transportation, law enforcement, these things that government is supposed to do for us, fire, emergency. And so, no, I think we need to be focusing on ending diversions. There's still $4 or $4.5 billion in dedicated funds in the state budget that are being diverted to other things than what they're intended for. And we need to get our fiscal house in order and start spending this money where we told the people that it would be spent. And so I think that's what we need to be looking at.
Okay. Mr. Hayes.
I think if you ask anyone about Proposition 7, they'll tell you that it's a step in the right direction, but it's definitely not enough. Senator Robert Nichols, the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, will tell you the same thing. Texas continues to grow because we've got a robust economy, we've got a limited government philosophy that makes job creation easy and that encourages people to move here, to open businesses here. And as that continues to explode, we're going to continue to stress our infrastructure here in Texas. And we have to be proactive about ensuring that we are planning not just to address today's needs, which I think is what Proposition 7 does. It makes it takes care of a lot of our maintenance issues, but we've got to be planning for additional roads as a core function of state government. State government has certain things that it has to be spending money on. And spending money on roads isn't just wasting money, that's an investment in our future. And it's an investment that the state needs to be making if we want to keep Texas a great place to move, a great place to move around, and a great place to live.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Well, several propositions. I did read your email about what was good to support and what wasn't. And I did vote for that. Everybody probably knows that the state budget is growing much faster than the population here. I believe from 1990 to 2012, the state budget rose 310%, whereas the population growth was 132%. So we're spending money faster than we're bringing it in. That is a problem. I believe in a zero-based budget, that we need to bring back everything, relook at it, and start over and say, where are we spending these dollars? Why are we spending them? And what can we better do to improve where we're spending them?
Okay, I'm going to drill down a little bit further into this, because you all have talked about revenue and you've talked about, where we can get some more revenue from. Well, let's talk about the reform side of transportation. So I'm kind of going to drag you into that topic, okay? Mr. Hefner, what is your opinion of how the regional mobility authorities work? 1 minute.
What is my opinion of how they work?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that familiar with the details of how they work. I know there's been a lot of talk about expanding Loop 49 over into other counties to where there's not traffic congestion and things of that nature. A lot of times, these folks are good people. They're looking ahead for economic growth and expansion. I think we need to be careful that we're not expanding these roads into people's properties in order to hope for economic development. There needs to be a real need, a narrow, specific need for traffic. Tyler's Grove, it's got a traffic problem. Some of these rural counties don't, and they want to send those roads to these rural counties and take people's land where there's not a traffic problem. So I think we just need to be careful on the specific purpose of eminent domain and building those roads.
Okay, Mr. Hayes, RMAs.
I think that's, as Texas continues to grow, you're going to continue to have this need for additional roads to facilitate that growth. One of the problems with these RMAs, with regional mobility authorities, is our increasing reliance on toll roads in order to take care of transportation in Texas. As long as we're not funding transportation at the state level adequately and holding those dollars accountable when they go to TxDOT, maintaining good oversight of the Department of Transportation, you're going to see an increased desire from people to look to anything in order to take care of their transportation needs, including toll roads. If we want to decrease the number of toll roads and not turn to these public-private partnerships, which once anything, public and private starts getting together, you're going to at least have the appearance of impropriety and the possibility of cronyism. And we don't want that in the state of Texas. And the best way to take care of our transportation dollars and keep everything above board is to ensure that we're spending our resources first and foremost where they need to be spent at the state level, on education, on transportation, and on infrastructure.
Mr. Davis.
An example I could think of, Highway 75 outside of Dallas, when that was built, state government went together with the road commission down there and said 75 is going to be the road that ends all roads. It will solve all problems. There was no forward thinking. Money was put into this program. And now we can see what happens with programs that don't look into the future and plan with dollars that are being allocated. That those roads, once they're built, probably over budget, over time, that they're no longer relevant when they are built. So I guess the biggest thing I can say is people are not looking into the future and using their tax dollars effectively.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to go over to education. About 40% of Texas high school graduates must take remedial, non-credited classes just to enter credited college classes. And I will say that 40% in some areas is kind of low. It's much higher in certain areas. So you just start at 40%. So if 40% of them need remediation, and only 15% of those who attend a community college go on to earn a college degree within 6 years. Give us some solutions to that problem that would be friendly to taxpayers, friendly to teachers, and friendly to parents and students. Mr. Davis.
I was talking to some educators yesterday while I was out of school for a veterans program, and I was asking them why it seems like the students are being dumbed down. And one thing was brought up was there was in the past, a bunch of tests that were given, I believe 15 tests that the educators had to teach to so that the students could get out of school, go into the next grade. And they said what they were actually doing was teaching to the test, not to the students' education. I remember when I went to school, the teachers taught us a wide variety of things that made us ready to go to school, go to college, and make us better citizens. And it seems like now they're just teaching to that test only. It has been reduced to 5 tests now, but they're still teaching to the test, and it seems like we're dumbing down our students.
Okay. Mr. Hebner.
Can you tell me, read that
Yes.
question to me?
I said, statistics show that an average of 40% of Texas high school graduates must take non-credited remedial classes just to enter to be ready to take credited college courses, and that would be in reading, math, and English. Only 15% of those who attend a community college ever go on to earn a college degree within 6 years. Given those, which I think are averages, and in some cases the statistics are much higher than that. So just given that, give us your solutions that would be to this problem, which is a problem. Tell us how we solve the problem in a way that is taxpayer-friendly, teacher-friendly, and parent and student-friendly.
I believe that teachers and educators in our public schools need to have more freedom to do their jobs. I'm still not clear on what you're saying there about the 40% and 15%, but
Well, that 40% of high school graduates are not prepared to go on and take a freshman college math, English, reading. They have to be remediated. They have to take non-credit courses before they can ever go on. And then after that, only 15% of those ever finish.
well, I think our teachers, the ones that I know and the ones that I go to church with, they're called to that profession, and they're having a hard time doing their job because the government keeps tying them down with regulations and requirements, and the more tests and regulations we throw at them, the more staff they have to hire to comply with all these rules, which keeps us from being able to pay them what they're worth. And I think we need to have more local freedom in the public education for these teachers to get in there and do what they're gifted at, to innovate and teach these kids. They're doing an incredible job providing the burden they're having to carry. I mean, they're not giving up, but a lot of them are losing the zeal because of these burdensome regulations. And I think we need to free them up and let them work.
Okay, Mr. Hayes.
The Texas Constitution states that the legislature has to fund an efficient system of public free schools because a general diffusion of knowledge is essential to liberty. Liberty is the highest aspect of our public education system. I'm so proud that I graduated from Texas public schools, and there is not a greater advocate for our public school system that is running for this office. Education is the key to living in a liberty-loving society because you can't really be free if your mind is a slave to ignorance. One of the things in Texas historically, education has always been a local issue. Local school boards making local decisions based on local values and standards. We have got to end a lot of the unfunded mandates that are crippling our public schools and crippling our community leaders across the state of Texas. One of the most recent ones, example, classrooms have to install video cameras for special ed classrooms, and they have to maintain a database of that going back 6 months. It's costing school districts thousands of dollars that they could have otherwise been spending on new books. They could have been spending on science equipment. They could have been spending in the classroom to make sure that our kids are graduating ready to go.
Thank you.
Can I say something about unfunded mandates?
Yeah, hold on one second. I think that I have to... Now that's good. Yeah, go ahead. You raise a point, then I'm going to give them a chance. So, go.
Unfunded mandates. Since I've been running for office, I've been asking a lot of questions to educators. And they brought up the points of unfunded mandates. They said the state of Texas is giving us things we need to do, but they're not funding it. So I was in a local school yesterday, Rains High School, and I said, can you tell me about unfunded mandates? And they said, well, first of all, we really don't have many of those here in the schools out here in East Texas. It doesn't affect us as much as, say, the bigger schools in the metropolitan areas. Unfunded mandates, though, I believe is a wrong thing to do in the state of Texas, because once you tell a school they have to do something, they have to come up with the funds somewhere. And if you don't fund it at state level, and then you're going to have to find a different way to do it, and that could be in local school taxes, which means my property taxes go up.
Okay, Mr. Hefner, you want to weigh in on that? Okay.
I'll say one thing that I learned from some teachers I met with the other day was there was a bill passed, I can't remember if it was HB 5 or 11, that allowed for the teaching of trades in high school, plumbing, electrical, welding, and they were all thrilled that that bill was passed to allow them to teach kids those things, where they'll be job ready as soon as they graduate to go out and work and make a good living. But it's hard to get a $100,000 a year welder to come in and teach kids how to weld for $35,000 a year. So, although it was a good idea, maybe it wasn't quite as well thought through. And I believe if we freed them up from a lot of these unreasonable regulations, they'd have the money needed to pay these teachers to get them in there and teach some of these classes. That's one example of freeing them up, letting them do their jobs.
Okay. Anybody else got a 30-second remark on mandates, unfunded mandates?
We've got to end the Robin Hood system of funding our public schools. We have got to break the one-size-fits-all mentality that Austin has. Austin thinks that if we can pass one thing, it's going to be just as good in Dallas as it is in Mount Pleasant. And that's ridiculous. Our East Texas schools are different than schools in urban areas. They should be held to different standards, local standards established at the local level by those local school board members that you elect and you see every day when you go to the store. We've got to return a mindset of local control to Austin.
Okay, I've got a real zinger of a question then. That opens up a really good question. Okay then, so if we're about local control, if we're really all about local control, how would you, and we're going to start with Mr. Hayes since he's the guy that brought it up, tell me in a minute how you're going to encourage people to seize that local control that frankly they already have. Because if you go down to the Azalea post office on any day of the week and you ask everybody coming out of there who represents them on the school board of the Tyler Independent School District, an overwhelming majority of them are going to not know, but they are going to be really mad about their property taxes. So, Philip, you're a smart guy. Tell us how we solve that problem.
One of the things I worked on in the legislature was transparency, like I said. One of the bills that we had last session was to include on ballot propositions for additional debt, the total amount of debt outstanding that whatever that entity has. Not only the principal amount, but also the interest payments on that debt. That's a good step in the right direction to increase transparency. We had a bill to start a taxpayer database on the comptroller website where you could type in your zip code and see all the levels of government that you live under and all of their debt levels and all of their taxing rates. That's what we need in the state of Texas. Now, people are not always going to be engaged. You can't force people to be engaged. That's what's great about America. If you just don't want to care about an issue, that's your right. And that's why I think that you have such a small turnout in these local elections. But when you start increasing transparency, when you start making it apparent to people about these almost invisible levels of government that they live under, then they become engaged. And it's our responsibility as citizens to engage our neighbors. That's what being in a community like this is about. That's what freedom is about. It's about you talking to your neighbors and coming up with solutions to your local problems. That's what we do with local control.
Okay, good. So, Mr. Davis, tell us what you believe local control is about. Do you believe that the citizens of the state of Texas already have the reins of power? Do you believe they just don't use them? Or what's the problem with local control?
That's a multifaceted question.
1 minute to answer.
Okay, and there's no set pat answer. Mr. Hayes said earlier, what we have here in East Texas is not commensurate with what we have in urban Dallas, Fort Worth, and so forth. The school boards there are dealing with completely different problems. It takes a lot more money probably to get their programs across, whereas the school programs in East Texas, again, I live in Rains County in Emory, and starting from discipline to education to the amount of students in a classroom is a lot different than what it is in a larger school. So yes, we do need local control because one problem is not the same in every school, and one size does not fit every school.
Okay. Mr. Hefner?
So the question is, do we have local control?
Yeah, just give us your opinion on local control. Do we have it? Have we not seized it? So,
We pretty much have local control in a lot of areas. Education, we do not. We're very hamstrung to the state. County governments have a lot of local control. City governments have probably more than counties. Cities can do anything not prohibited in state law. Counties can only do what is specifically allowed in state law. But we have a real problem with voter apathy. When I was elected county commissioner, I expected to be getting a lot of phone calls on issues, and we rarely got phone calls. I mean, there was very little, even when there was tax increases being discussed, which I voted against, there still was very little reaction from the community. So voter apathy is a problem. I think local transparency is a good idea. The more transparent we can be, but a lot of this is we kind of ask for it by being apathetic in our society. So it's a real problem we need to work on.
okay, this next question is going to be about school choice, and it will be 1 minute. Let's see. Mr. Hefner, I want you to tell us what you believe the impact would be on the state of Texas as a whole and on any problems we have today in education. What is your opinion on what the impact would be if school choice passed and was signed into law in Texas?
I believe in free market. I believe in personal responsibility and personal accountability. So I believe that in the concept of school choice, I believe in the parent's right to educate their child, be it public school, private school, or homeschool. So that's fundamental to our society, is the parent's right. So I believe if implemented properly, without a bunch of strings being attached and things like that, that it would be positive, because competition makes us better in industry, in when we manufacturing and things. Competition makes us produce a better product for a lower price, and if people don't like our product, they don't buy it, we go out of business. So I believe it would be positive.
Okay. Mr. Hayes.
You know, competition is great if it's on a level playing field. If we pass school choice today without eliminating a lot of the unfunded mandates on our schools, you're not going to see public schools get better in the state of Texas. They're going to get worse, because you're going to be taking out some of the most engaged students whose parents really care about their education and sending them to private school. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Parents should have a right to educate their children as they see fit. But if we really want to solve the education problem in Texas and make our public schools better, we have to eliminate a lot of these unfunded mandates first. Because school choice passed today, where you could take your student out of the public schools to any school you wanted, would not solve the problem, because our public schools would not be able to compete against these private schools because they are saddled and crushed by state requirements. I would be in favor of school choice. I worked on Senate Bill 276 with Senator Campbell. Taxpayer savings grants would have given you about 60% of what the state spends on maintenance and operations costs to send your student to a school of their choice. But if we pass school choice, we have to eliminate a lot of the regulations and ridiculous standards on our public schools out of Austin.
Okay, Mr. Hayes, I'm going to do a redirect on you. To give me some specifics about which mandates must be delivered first. So give me your top 2 or 3.
I think we like that mandate that I mentioned about the video cameras in classrooms. That needs to go. A lot of mandates about the time that it takes to be in school, the amount of testing that's required, that needs to be significantly reduced. We have to reduce a lot of the barriers that it takes for people to become teachers. You have to get a teaching certificate in order to teach in the state of Texas. Even if you've got a PhD, you're going to have to go get a teaching certificate in order to teach at our public schools. Those need to be significantly reduced. In order for us to compete against these private schools, our public schools, which we should hope are strong, which we're constitutionally obligated to keep strong, we have to eliminate those mandates before we allow schools to accept school choice. Or we require that the private schools that will accept state money have at least some level of standards attached, some testing requirements, so that we can properly evaluate whether or not those students are doing better in these private schools, whether or not we are doing better in our public schools. There should be some strings attached where if we don't take some of the mandates off the public schools, we should attach some strings to the money that follows the student.
Mr. Davis, 1 minute.
I believe in school choice. I believe that every parent has a right to send their child or educate their child the way they see fit, as long as it meets standards, and they can send that child, give that child a proper education. Some homeschool people, maybe they shouldn't homeschool their kids because they don't have the disciplines in English, science, and math. But I think overall, most of the people doing that are doing well. Mr. Hayes brought up that the public schools could not compete. Well, maybe they need to change what they're doing and get on board with what's right, because a lot of these public schools are letting the students run the schools instead of the schools run the students. And personally, if I was in a large school in South Dallas, I wouldn't want my child in that school, and I'd want him in a private school.
Okay, thank you. Now let's go to the budget. Reforming the budget. I would like for you to take a minute and highlight 2 areas where state budget reform is needed and describe what that reform process would look like. Okay? So you're going to highlight 2 areas where state budget reform is needed and describe what that reform process would look like. Now, this is in a minute. So this is like a 10,000-foot view of this type of question. And then if I need to redirect, I will. So let's start with Philip on this one. Reforming the budget.
I think one of the things we have to look at is the tax and expenditure limit. Over the past decade, Texas, the rate of spending has increased by about 63%. That's 8.8% higher than it would have been if the rate of spending was tied to the rate of population growth plus inflation. Right now, the tax and expenditure limit is tied to your personal income level, which doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. Number one being that as your personal income gets better, you should require less government spending, not more. So we've got to tie the tax and expenditure limit to the rate of population growth plus inflation. Another problem with the tax and expenditure limit is that it only applies to non-dedicated revenue items. That's only about half the budget. And so they can move things around and increase the size of spending while staying under that limit. We should tie the tax and expenditure limit, apply it to all areas of the budget. I also want to reform the margins tax. That's a tax that is causing untold economic damage to Texas. All taxes aren't necessarily the greatest thing, but this one probably causes the most harm of any other tax. We should eliminate the margins tax. It only accounts for 10% of our state budget. That we could more than make up with that in sales tax revenue from the increased economic activity that would result from eliminating it.
Okay, Mr. Davis, highlight 2 areas where state budget reform is needed and describe what a reform process would look like in a minute.
Only 1 minute. Again, I want to reiterate, from 1998 to 2012, state spending rose 310%, whereas the population growth rose 132%. Our state debt rose 125% over the last 10 years. One of the budget solutions we do would be reallocating spending, what we do in the water supply, education, law enforcement. 2 of the things we could do to change what we do in our budget is, one thing is a program into schools. English as a second language. Who pays for that? Do the illegal immigrants that are sending their children to our public schools pay for that? No, each and every one of you are paying for that indirectly. So you could do away with that. Sending illegal immigrants to schools in Texas that's funded and paid for by you, I wouldn't allow that. I know it's being hard, but somebody else, I don't want to pay for it. So that's one way you could save money on the budget.
Okay. Mr. Hefner.
One of my pet peeves is the diversions of dedicated funds. The state has assessed taxes on certain things like homeowners insurance premiums, fireworks that you buy, there's a tax on those. Those taxes were put in place to be dedicated to certain things. And every year, there's a bill passed to dedicate those funds. The next day, they bring up another bill to undedicate those funds. They just go into the budget and they put whatever into that dedicated activity, however much money they feel like. And that's about $4 billion. Maybe 3.5. They've lowered it down. They're working on it. But to me, that's just wrong. You told me that you're going to take my money, put it into a volunteer fire department fund, and then it go to that volunteer fire department grant fund. They did restore the funding to that particular fund, but that's one issue. Another thing is Medicaid spending. It makes up a huge portion of our state budget, and I think we need to look at that to make sure there's not fraud taking place in that, because it's like several $1 billion.
Okay. Here's a question for everybody. I think this one should be a yes or no. Would you support spending caps for local government so that a vote by the people is necessary to spend above the combined rate of inflation and population growth? And I mean all local government. I'm talking about your city, your nice little city council and mayors, and I'm talking about your county judge and commissioners, and all of these extra taxing districts that everybody, like MUDs and everything. So I want to know if each one of you would say, if I put a letter in front of you and I said, I want you to pledge to the people of House District 5 that you will go to Austin and you will fight for local spending caps. I want to know if you would sign that letter. Mr. Davis.
I've already signed a letter and sent it in, it's Taxpayer Protection Pledge. I don't know if I'm the only candidate here that's done that, but that's been filed in Washington. And yes, I believe that you should have to have the constituents or whoever's having their taxpayers spent, they should approve it first. And I think there should be a cap. You should only spend what you got. I mean, I live within a budget. The government should have to also.
Mr. Hayes.
I agree that we should spend what we've got. I do think it is important to note, though, that certain government activities require the government to go into debt as we plan for future growth. Certain debt proposals, a reasonable amount of debt, is necessary in order to facilitate growth, especially in the state of Texas. So I wouldn't be in favor of allowing local governments to not go into any debt at all. Specifically, though, about tying it to the population growth and inflation rate, I would not support that until the state of Texas has tied our own rate of spending to the rate of population growth plus inflation. That should be our first step. We cannot tell our local communities that they can't go above population growth plus inflation if the state government's not willing to say it. I believe the state government should say that. I will work tirelessly to ensure that we tie state spending to population growth plus inflation, not just for non-dedicated revenue, but for all revenue at the state of Texas. And then, yes, I will support a local spending limit on local communities. But the state of Texas has to lead by example first and show our local cities, our local counties that we've delegated authority to how to govern efficiently and fiscally responsibly.
Mr. Hebner.
You know, the states created the cities and they created the counties. And while I would support caps, to my understanding, there's already 8% cap on increasing the tax rate in counties. I'm not familiar if the cities have a
Well, there's
cap.
the rollback thing.
Right,
that
the rollback rate.
We know
So-
how that's gained, so.
I do believe we need to have some caps in place, but I don't believe we need to encroach too far into the local control, because we have controls in place, and they're called elections. We elect our local officials, and I think it's important that we give them the freedom, and the people control their spending through their elected officials. But you know, I wouldn't want to just let them run wild and free, but as long as we had a reasonable cap in place, yes.
Okay, let's go back to illegal immigration a minute. We've not talked about, let you all give an idea on tell me what you could do as a legislator that would help deter illegal immigration, and take 1 minute to do this. Mr. Hefner. Thank you so much, Samuel, for being here. We appreciate you at CBS 19. Mr. Hefner.
You know, we've talked about what we could do in sanctuary cities. Since we created those governments, we can tell them, we can give them some rules. And the cities, we could say, we're going to not give you grants, funding for grants, if you don't cooperate with the federal officials on detainers and stuff like that. And then I think we'd work towards this border compact. I think that makes sense. And yeah, we can't just make state laws that violate the United States Constitution. And so I think the interstate compact allows for the Constitution allows for the interstate compact, and I think it's something we need to work towards. So those are a couple of things I'd be looking at as a legislator.
Okay, Mr. Davis. Deterrent to illegal immigration to Texas.
One of the ways you can stop it is quit hiring illegal immigrants. As long as they know they're going to get free handouts from the state government, local authorities, they can go to school, they can get in-state tuition, they come up here and they can go to work in violation of federal and state law. We need to crack down on people who are hiring these people and say enough's enough. And until that's done, people are going to keep coming across the border because we're rewarding illegal behavior. And until we quit rewarding illegal behavior, it probably won't stop.
Mr. Hayes.
In 1849, over 200 Texans were carried off in Comanche raids. And rather than waiting for the federal government to act, the governor of Texas told the Texas Rangers to get after them and secure our frontier. And that's exactly what the state did, and we sent Congress the bill, and eventually in 1855, they ponied up $7.5 million for what we'd undertaken to secure our border. That's exactly what we need to do today. We need to create a state border patrol, authorize them to do operations along the Texas border, and we should spend our Texas resources, not to secure any other state, but spend our Texas resources to secure our Texas border under the direction of Texan officers for the protection of our Texas citizens. And we should send Congress the bill.
Thank you. I've got one more question. It's a short answer, and then we're going to go to the 2 minutes you have to rebut or readdress any issue of your choice. So, just a yes or no on this one. And we're going to start with Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, do you support the complete and total decriminalization of marijuana?
No, I do not. I think we need to look at efforts to work towards lessening sentences. I think when you've got somebody that's been caught with a moderate amount of marijuana, that's probably a little more dangerous than them even having alcohol. So we need to look at efforts that we're not ruining people's lives for making a one-time mistake. I think that's something that we should do as a state. But we should not completely legalize marijuana, no.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
You probably know my answer. Marijuana is a blight on society. I've seen what it does to kids and people. They lose their ability to go out and work, think straight. So no, we should not legalize marijuana.
Mr. Hefner.
You wanted a yes or no question?
Yes, that's
Do
what
I
I said.
support legal decriminalization?
Yes. Would you support decriminalization, the complete and total decriminalization of marijuana?
No.
Okay. All right. Now, so you're going to get to, and by the way, you all did a most outstanding job. Outstanding job. Each candidate is going to have 2 minutes to rebut or to readdress any issue of choice. So now what I'm going to do is do a complete reversal of the last round we just had, and then we will go by your numbered lots that you drew for the close. So we're going to go in reverse. So Cole, you're going to have 2 minutes to rebut anything or to address a completely different issue. 2 minutes.
I guess, me and Philip had a little spar in there over the interstate compact. I believe that is a proper way, an effective way to address our border security issues. It is in this United States Constitution that the border security is a federal government responsibility. It is also in the United States Constitution that states can come together, form an interstate compact, and enforce the laws that the federal government is not enforcing. We can't just create a law to create a state agency to go down there and do what the U.S. Constitution authorizes the federal government to do. So I think the mechanisms are already in place, unless you're going to amend the Constitution to allow the state to do those things. I think we need to look at interstate compact with the several states to address this issue. I think it works.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
Let me be clear, this is not our close, correct?
Right.
Okay. The only thing I want to add is I left out a city, Austin, being a sanctuary city. There are 4 sanctuary cities that's looked at in Texas, and Austin was the 4th one. So that's my do-over, and I don't want to spend a lot of time. I notice Cole's kids are getting sleepy.
Okay, Mr. Hayes.
On the interstate compact, we might disagree on issues every now and then. As your state representative, though, I can guarantee to you that you will always know exactly where I stand on an issue, and I will always maintain an open office so that you can communicate to me your thoughts on the issues. I might still be convinced on the interstate compact. I'm just not in favor of Texas resources going to secure some other border when we're already sending money to the federal government for a job they're not doing. I wanted to talk about the marriage question that someone else got, because I think that's really important to the future of our society. One of the bills that I worked on last session was called Senate Joint Resolution 10. It would have proposed a constitutional amendment that you could not be forced to act out of accordance with your deeply held religious beliefs, specifically marriage. I was incredibly disappointed and disheartened when the Texas Association of Business came out on the steps of the Capitol against that bill. It is unconscionable for a government to tell you that you have to give up your religious rights in order to operate a business in this society. Your deeply held religious beliefs are not an issue to be revoked at the whim of a crazy government. They are your rights instituted from God, and you should have the right to worship and act in the public sphere in accordance with your faith. It is vital that Texas work to pass legislation to strengthen our communities and to work against, even if it means working against sometimes our business community, because what is right may not always be popular, and what freedom entails may not always be popular. But that is something that we have to put aside as Americans and work towards constantly. Religious liberty has to be defended in this country and in this state.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now it is time for, make sure I got all that. Yes, it is time for the closing statements, and you will have 2 minutes. So we're going to go in the order that you guys drew lots. First will be Mr. Hayes, second will be Mr. Davis, and third and final will be Mr. Hefner. So, Mr. Hayes.
I thought I drew second, but is that, I can go first, that's fine. Today, God's plan is still marching on. We face a lot of challenges as a country and as a state, but how do we respond to those challenges? It's easy to be scared. I go talk to a lot of groups, and a lot of people are scared and fearful about the direction of this country. But that's not how Americans have ever responded to challenge. I'm not running because I am fearful about the direction of this country. I'm running to be state representative because I see the enormous potential that this state and this country still have. And I will work hard every day to make sure that my state lives up to my expectations so that my country can be worthy of its special calling in this world. God tells us he didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and self-control. And not being scared, not having a spirit of fear, it doesn't mean that you're naive. It doesn't mean that you don't work hard. No one will match my knowledge, my work ethic, my discernment, or my passion as your state representative. But my motivation will never be my fear about the direction of this country. Instead, my motivation will be my certainty that our belief in freedom is so much stronger than anything we face. Our earthly freedom, bought by the blood of countless patriots across history, and my ultimate freedom bought by Christ at Calvary. These sacrifices define our lives. The world cannot afford an indecisive America. This country still has what Reagan called a rendezvous with destiny. All we have to do is show them the way. And we show them in Texas when we govern by conservative principles, guided by our East Texas values, and we build a state that is the envy and example of the rest of the nation. I am the most conservative, the most experienced, the most passionate candidate for this office. So I'm asking you to let me be your voice down in Austin, because we have work to do, and his truth is still marching on.
Mr. Davis.
Yesterday, I was in Rains County High School for Veterans Day. As we all know, that was Veterans Day was yesterday. And they were honoring myself with about 100 other veterans. And I sat back there and I watched these kids singing songs, patriotic songs, listening to other veterans' stories as we were being introduced. And it made me feel very proud to have been part of being in the military forces of my country and wearing the uniform for my country. And as I reflected back on all the time I traveled around the world wearing that uniform in both peacetime and in combat, I started thinking about, our country is still not safe. We face a lot of dangers, both from within and without. Enemies, both foreign and domestic. So with that in mind, I will be a conservative leader in Austin. I've been tested under fire in combat and in peacetime, making decisions that affect men and women, holding their life in my hand and their welfare. And I believe with that life experience that I have the ability to be a tested and true representative for the people of East Texas. So I would like to ask for your support and your vote. As you notice, I'm not a politician. I don't really speak like a politician. I've been a soldier all my life. But I want to be your representative, and I will do the best job that I possibly can, and I will be honest and forthright with all people.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Hefner.
I'm not running for this office because I want a title of state representative. I have a title. I have 6 kids. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. And I don't need the title. I'm running. I'm optimistic that we can return our state and our country to the principles of our founding fathers. If we elect strong men and women that have the courage and the fire in their belly to stand and fight for the principles this country was founded on, we can return to those principles. The world needs a strong America, and America needs a strong Texas. And if we lose Texas, there's nowhere else to go. This is it. This is the last place. Where are you going to go? To California? They're already sunk. We're the big state, and we need to be strong. I've got 6 kids. My parents were able to educate me the way they saw fit. They were able to take me to worship where they saw fit. We were able to, my dad had a business. He was self-employed. He worked hard, made a decent living. He was able to take us fishing and hunting on vacations and enjoy the fruits of his labor. And I fear that when my kids are my age and they have kids, that those freedoms won't be in place. And I want to be able to look at them when they ask me, Daddy, what did you do? What happened? Why did we lose our freedoms? I can say, I was standing in the gap. I was fighting the battle instead of I made a lot of money or had a lot of fun. But I'm optimistic that they won't have to ask that question if we elect the right people to the office. I ask for your prayers. This is hard. It's hard on a family. It's not something that, it's not as glorious as if you're doing it for the right reason. It's not some glory train. But I want to fight for my kids' future and for your kids' future. And I'd appreciate your prayers and your support in this race. Thank y'all for coming.
Thank you so much. I want to tell all of them personally. I've done a lot of candidate forums, and I have to say that you guys have the right temperament, You have hearts for service. I can tell that from every one of you, and I appreciate the thought that you put forward in answering the questions. Job well done.
And I like these guys. Thank you. I want to take this moment to thank this crowd for coming out and having the civic interest and the desire and the public responsibility to come and hear these gentlemen speak. It's a compliment to each and every one of you. And would you join me in thanking these gentlemen for coming?